Hi, welcome back to the channel. As you can see, I'm not in the Joe Blog studio. I'm actually on holiday. If you look behind me, I think you can probably see the sea just there. Well, I can see it, and if you can't see it, and it's beautiful here. I'm having a really nice time. Now, the reason that I wanted to make this video is that there's been an extraordinary piece of news coming out from Russia. Russia has now banned the export of diesel products, which you may think, well, does that really matter? Does Russia export much diesel? Well, this is huge news because on average, Russia exports between 22 and 25 million barrels of diesel every single month. Now that is a lot of diesel. If you just think about 25 million barrels of diesel, I can't even comprehend that. It is a huge amount. And Russia has now banned the export of all of it because it's running short domestically, and so it can't afford to actually export any of it. It needs to preserve all of those supplies for its home market. Now, there's a number of different implications of this. Well, before we go on to that, actually, I just wanted to remind you that Russia has already introduced a ban on jet fuel. That was one of the first bans introduced, and that is in place until the end of November of this year. So that's going to be in place for quite a considerable time so far. And to put that into perspective, Russia earns on average around $1 billion from the export of jet fuel. So it's losing $1 billion every single month that ban is in place. And it's already been in place for a couple of months, and it's going to run through to the end of November. So that's billions of dollars lost from just jet fuel. The gasoline export ban has been in place for around about 6 weeks. That's in place until the end of July at the moment. However, I think it's likely it will be extended. And just to give you the perspective on that, Russia earns around $1 billion per month from gasoline exports as well. So gasoline plus jet fuel is the loss of $2 billion per month. But the diesel ban, Russia is making around $3 billion per month from its diesel exports. It's by far the biggest export market for Russia. So banning the export of that, it's going to lose $3 billion per month, plus the $2 billion that it's losing from gasoline and jet fuel sales. So $5 billion per month has been stopped from all of its export revenue. And the reason why this is happening, we've covered it before over the last few months, but Ukraine has significantly increased its drone attacks. So it's ramped up its program of attacking lots of different infrastructure within Russia. And the primary infrastructure that it's been targeting over the last few months has been Russian oil refineries. Now, Russia has 44 mega refineries. These are absolutely huge facilities, and we've touched on this before, but crude oil, which Russia pulls out of the ground, when you actually, when you drill and you get the crude oil out, that's not actually useful to anybody. You can't use crude oil for anything because it's got too many impurities. It just doesn't, you couldn't put that into an engine. It would kill the engine immediately. So you have to pass it through a refining process. And these refineries are highly complex chemical plants where you're doing lots of different things to that crude oil. You're heating it and cracking it and doing lots of technical stuff to get the refined products that you can then put into different types of engines. And so there's a strata in terms of the level of refinery, and the base level. You've got sort of asphalt and things that are pretty basic, right through to aviation fuel, jet fuel, which is right at the top of the list. And the reason why Russia is doing this, not just to provide fuel for its own market, but obviously to make profit, to make some money from that crude oil. Because if you just sell the crude oil, if you're just exporting the basic raw material, then you're not really making much profit because that's the lowest price of all of the oil products. So putting it through your refinery process basically adds value. It increases the sale price that you would get for things like diesel, gasoline, jet fuel. Also, there's the biggest demand for those products globally. Lots of countries want to buy the finished article. And the other benefit that Russia has is that by creating a refinery infrastructure, so these 44 mega refineries, they employ hundreds of thousands of Russians. So lots of people now earn their livelihood from working in those refineries. So that was all good and well when everything was going to plan. But since the war in Ukraine started, and particularly over the last 6 to 12 months, Ukraine has targeted all of those refineries. It's quite difficult to defend these refineries because they're really big. You know, we're not talking about a small facility. These stretch over really large areas, these refineries, and they have different parts to the process. So there's lots of different things going on simultaneously. And in many of those refineries, they're all linked. So you put the crude oil in at one end, and then it goes through all the different parts of the refinery process until you get the final finished products out the other end. So one drone strike that hits one part of that facility can actually close down the entire facility. Probably not permanently, but certainly for a period of time whilst you run all of the checks and make sure that everything is okay, and you have to find the parts to replace it and do the repairs and all of that. So every single day that Russia is losing the capacity from these refineries, it's losing money, and more importantly, it's losing capacity. And that's why Russia is now having to ban the export of all of these products, because multiple refineries have been hit. Some of them have been hit multiple times over the past few months. That causes the refinery to have to shut down, so therefore it can't produce any of the finished products. So that's a problem. And that's why Russia now doesn't have enough fuel to service its home market. And that's why these export bans have been put into place, because the Russian authorities want to make sure that the people of Russia can still fill their vehicles, that the farmers can fill all of their tractors and combine harvesters, because we're now into the summer period in Russia, so they will be harvesting all of the crops. And Russia's a big exporter of agricultural products. So there's lots of different knock-on implications to not having enough fuel in the domestic market. So Russia is prioritizing all of that. It's also prioritizing all of its military requirements, because all of the fighting in Ukraine, all of the military needs fuel, and that fuel is all coming from Russia. It has to be transported to all of those areas. So it's prioritizing all of those demands, and therefore it's having to ban these exports. So it's now losing all of this export revenue. But in addition to that, it's actually worse, because it's now been announced that Russia is importing fuel, and quite bizarrely, it's importing some of it from India. Now, India doesn't have oil. It doesn't have its own huge oil fields. It's buying Russian crude oil, refining it through its own refineries in India that employ lots of Indian people, and then selling those high margin products at a really big profit back to Russia. So this is a disaster from Russia's point of view, because as these refineries get hit and their capacity goes down, Russia is having to export more crude oil because it's got nowhere to store it. So the only other option would be to cut off the supplies of crude. It doesn't want to do that. It wants to keep them pumping, because if it does cut off that flow, it will cause problems down the road. So by losing the capacity through the refineries, Russia is forced to sell more crude oil at a bargain low price, because it has to offer a discount to encourage countries to actually buy Russian crude over any other country's crude. And the waivers that were put into place as part of the US trying to balance the books globally for oil have now fallen away. So the sanctions are back fully in place on Russian crude oil. So it's still logistically quite a nightmare for anybody to buy Russian. You've got to make sure that you're not going to get sanctioned, that all the payments are not going to get sanctioned. So there's lots of hurdles to go over before you can actually buy that. But India is now buying it and then selling back at a profit all of the refined products. And this really tells us that the drone warfare that's going on at the moment from Ukraine is working, because it's really hurting the Russian economy. When you're hearing stories of all of Russia's most profitable exports having to be cancelled for the rest of July, and probably, let's realistically say, it's going to be extended, that ban, because Ukraine has really ramped up the attacks, and it's likely on this news, if you're a drone operator, that you're going to try to get more and more strikes in on the refineries. And as I've covered in recent videos, it's not just the refineries that Russia's having to defend. Ukraine is attacking things like electricity substations in Crimea. It's attacking the ports. It's attacking the actual facilities where the oil is being dragged. It's attacking rail networks, basically anything relating to Russian infrastructure, and some chemical companies and lots of other things. And the problem with that is that Russia doesn't know where to defend itself. In a recent video, I mentioned that a recent strike went 1,700 miles from the Ukraine border. So in terms of the range of these drones, it is absolutely huge. So when you draw a map of 1,700 miles from the Ukrainian border, that covers virtually all of these 44 mega refineries, plus hundreds and hundreds of different types of infrastructure, and it's impossible for Russia to be able to defend all of those facilities simultaneously. So that's the problem that Russia's facing. That's why it's having all of these outages. And the more success that Ukraine has is encouraging Ukraine to keep that target in sight and to send more drones. So this is only going to get worse from Russia's point of view. So I wanted to make this video really just to make sure that you're in the know that Russia has now banned all diesel exports on top of the gasoline and jet fuel ban. That means it's not making any profit from any of those products. In fact, it doesn't even have enough of those products to provide for its own people and businesses. So it's now having to import some of the finished products in order to keep the supplies balanced. So Russia is now paying for things that it could be producing itself, but unfortunately it can't because of the damage that's been inflicted by the drones. So I just wanted to bring you up to speed on that. If you've liked what I've said today, if you've liked seeing me here and maybe seeing the sea behind me, I'm looking quite relaxed. Hopefully I've got a bit of colour in my cheeks. If you've enjoyed seeing me saying this, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Maybe actually, if you could hit that hype button, which is next to the thumbs up, there's a little hype there. It does boost this video. It gives it more juice with the algorithm. Not entirely sure how it works, but it does help promote it to more people and hopefully get a few more views, which would make me happy. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video all the way through to the end. I'm now heading out for dinner, so I will see you again on the next video, but thanks for watching.